because they're not family courts. And that's why I liked our interview with Kevin. Is he stated family courts do not exist. It's a marketing name.
Yeah.
They're domestic relations courts. And all the
Well, they're
podcasts,
civil.
all the shows out there use the term family courts.
But you know what? It's
Well,
actually a civil
that's the
court.
thing is they're part of the probate.
No, it
They're
depends on
not
the
civil, they're
state.
probate, basically.
It depends on the state. It's
Yeah,
really
exactly.
a
And that's
form of
where it gets a little
civil.
funky.
Right. It's really a form of civil court that they've created because they had so many. You've heard me say this many times.
Yeah.
Family
Well,
court
I've
is
done
the
yeah.
only
It
court,
started
civil
back
court
in
that has to have it.
64.
You've heard me say this. Family court is the only court that has to have its own docket under civil because there's so many cases. And
Yeah.
that's
Family
huge.
courts were created officially around 64.
Okay.
And then it just migrated from there because you got more people getting divorces, the new generation, the hippie movement and all this stuff. Nobody was getting married. So, like you said, the civil courts that were already established were getting so inundated with these private matters that they had no choice but to create a court to handle just this. The problem they did is when they created this, they didn't outline the specifics of their jurisdiction and what laws they were to apply. So these family courts, and that's why one of the reasons why it varies from state to state, is every state just grabbed laws and then created it and built it from there. So now we have for lack of a better word, a hodgepodge of a court system. Yeah, well, what I'll do is we'll add. That's the power of editing. I can add this in later on, and after our intro and everything. But let's start with the truth of family court or domestic relations court. The truth of the truth of domestic relations courts, and we can add parental alienation at the end. But that covers the whole subject matters that we are going to talk about.
Yep.
So we'll try that a little bit and see how it looks and how it sounds, and then if we need to change it, we can. But I wouldn't change it too often, But yeah, so they got so inundated with all this stuff. That's why you have states that actually
do a count so you can easily cut section out. So 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, I will. That's why you hear me pausing off and on. But they got inundated, and that's why there are states that have some of their jurisdiction in wildlife laws. South Carolina is one of them. Is some of their child custody laws come from wildlife and game laws from back in the day.
Explain that.
And they just converted it.
Explain that.
It's amazing what okay. In South Carolina, when they created their family courts, they, like most states, they didn't really have a structure on what laws to apply. Most of it's all maritime law. That is a general deal across the board, is most of their laws are maritime. But as these states grew, a lot of states, like South Carolina being one of the original 13 colonies, they concentrated more on wildlife and game because that was their survival thing, So a lot of the laws got pulled from wildlife and game as far as possessions, stuff you could do. It's really weird. I'll see if I have it on my desktop. I'll see if I can't pull it somewhere, and then I'll bring it onto one of the shows, and we'll show people. These are the way these laws were pulled from. But okay, let's go. 1.
So the historical
2.
Would be...
Yeah. Let's go. 1, 2, 3. Okay, folks, welcome to the debate show, that we're going to start titling Truth in Domestic Relations Courts. Because one of the things me and Joani love about the way we're doing this is we're not just talking about parental alienation. We're talking about the historical aspects of family courts or domestic relations courts, or what they're called. We're talking about shared parenting. We're going to cover a whole wide subject matter because you can't just cling on to one subject matter. everybody has an opinion on, these issues, and that's our purpose, is to get that information out there, but it has to be factual. And that's one thing we do, is we do a lot of research. Joni's got over 30 years. I've been at this for over 8 years. Um, and we both counseled thousands and thousands of parents and stuff. So today we're going to talk about something Joni's been working on, and it is a wide variety of statistics on something that is always brought up in domestic relations courts, is men versus women in domestic violence and murders. So, Joni, I'm going to turn this over to you now.
Well, what we're finding, Clint, is that maybe decades ago, more women may have been abused by men. This has changed over big time, that women are abusing men at the same rate that men abuse women. But it goes beyond this, because there are other statistics that get weighed in here. More men are murdered. More men commit suicide. Um, More men have depression. These stats tell us a lot more about this dynamic of gender. And when you put this all together, the reality comes back out that it does not matter what the gender is. It's about the behavior and actions that we need to be focused on. It's not whether mother A murdered her ex-husband. Yes, it's happening, and it's becoming more prevalent. It's the fact that it's happening no matter what gender. When we can take that gender issue out of the equation, we can better address these horrific issues that occur in not all families, but in all families that are dealing with custody issues. Even without a custody issue, go ahead.
One of the things I like the fact is that 99.9% of the time in domestic relations courts, they use the term statistics. Now, let me ask two questions. First off, where are you pulling your numbers from?
There's various sources. A lot of this comes from the CDC, the federal government's agencies, domestic violence agencies, research and studies. There's specific research and studies and there must be about 20 of them, on men and being abused and why men don't report it. It makes sense. A man often will not report that they've been abused. Sometimes they don't even realize they're being abused, because this is the way they were treated in their family of origin to begin with, right? They also don't report because they don't realize, well, maybe if, even though it's happened in my family of origin, they don't equate that it shouldn't have happened then either, so they think it's maybe normal. They also don't report because it often gets turned around and they're the ones being arrested when all they were doing was defending themselves by putting their hands up. And in putting the hands up, they might have scratched their ex. That's not abuse. That's self-protection. Many men don't report because they're afraid of getting laughed at, accused of being weak. There's Denise Hines has some massive research and studies on this, as well as several other great researchers. And I want to bring up something that, this doesn't mean that women aren't being abused here. There's a difference in the way men and women abuse. Men are more likely to use their physical hands. Women are more likely to use a poison or a deadly weapon. The one abuse that they both use equally is psychological abuse. Any kind of domestic violence involves psychological abuse, but there are cases where it is nothing but psychological. There is no physical, there is no sexual. It is just straight psychological abuse.
Let me ask this, Joni. Why is it that when we hear the term domestic violence, all we hear are men accosting women? Why is that the most popular media thrown out there?
Because unfortunately the women's organizations are heavily funded. They're getting all the grants and funding, therefore they have the money for the to pay for all the advertising and to pay to get, the support they want. It doesn't make it true. Just like we know there's a lot of corruption that goes on in the courts, just like we know that there's a good old boys and girls attorney network that is heavily connected to judges and other professionals, it doesn't mean that it's correct. It just means that there's a conflict of interest and they're all working in tandem, not for the best interest of the child, but for the best interest of themselves. In Connecticut, we've had quite a few
Okay, so
attorneys.
I'm going to play devil's advocate right now, and I'm going to say you're blowing smoke because we were brought up to understand domestic violence means men beating women. Women do not have the ability to beat men. I mean, this is what we were brought up with. Okay,
Okay,
so
so
come
let's look
on.
at all
You're
our,
telling
let's
me
go back.
that there are studies out there.
Let's go back to
You're telling
Egypt.
me there are studies out there.
Let's go back to
Go ahead.
Egypt, women rulers and who that abused. There were plenty of those. Cleopatra. Many of these women who ran the Roman and Greek empires and whatnot, they abused men. How does that not equate? What's happened is men that get abused weren't speaking up. But women were speaking up. Women shelters, there's shelters for women were developed, shelters for this, for that, everything for women. In fact, there is very little medical funding for men and tons of it for women for breast cancer, ovarian cancer, whatever it is, domestic violence, tons for women. I'm going to say that a lot of this came up when women began to get the right and the voice. Don't get me wrong, there was an important voice being voiced there because women weren't getting the support they needed, and it had been a patriarchal society. But guess what? Before it was patriarchal, it was maternal. And before it was maternal, it was whatever. This is a pendulum that just swings back and forth. And at this point in society, it's kind of swimming back and forth in the middle because we're now finding that the stats for women being abused isn't really completely accurate because they're women abusing women. Women are killing, harm, and murder more children than men do. Women, and it's not because it's part of their personality. In part it could be because at the statistics are partially involved the fact that women for decades were, because of the tender years doctrine, were getting custody, so they had the children more often than the men. So yeah, if more women were getting custody, of course the statistics going to be that more women abuse children. But now it's a lot more of an equal shared situation where we have just as many fathers as mothers that are getting children in this century, or in this last decade, I should say, not even century, this last decade. But if you go back 300 years, you will see that women have been abusing and murdering men for decades. I mean, very recently, just since January of this year, I think I saw a list of about 12 murders that were committed by women against men. Just that one, just against men. And my favorite is they all claim it's self-defense. I'm sorry. If it can be self-defense for a woman, why can't it be a self-defense for a man when he's being attacked with a frying pan? It doesn't make any difference. It's self-defense.
Okay. So I'm going to interject here because I just looked this up. I put in Google women abusers. The first thing I get is the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Then you go to the where it kind of gives you your breakdown with what gender has the highest rate of abuse. It says women. Now I asked for women abusers, but all of a sudden I'm getting statistics and numbers only for women
Because
who
you're
are
looking
being
at the
abused.
stupid ChatGPT.
So,
Don't get me wrong. I like AI, Clint, but it's inaccurate. I had a fight with Claude AI because it kept telling me that women are more abused than men. And I'm going, no. And I had to actually physically provide the evidence to Claude to show that Claude that he had that it had the wrong statistics, that the more recent statistics show that 1 in 3 women are abused, 1 in 3 men are abused. That the statistics of abuse of men and women is pretty close to 50-50. 49% to 51%, something like that. There's not a big enough difference. It's just the AI
Well,
programs, a
see,
lot of what's out there has been paid for by the women's organizations to promote.
this is my thing, and I'm glad you brought this up. Now, everybody today uses some form of AI, but we forget AI is a program written with guidelines by a person. So I can make this AI do whatever I want by putting a directive in saying only concentrate or only state women are more abused than men. And that's what that AI program does. It's a program. So I like you early on, and when I started advocating everything, I looked into all this. And what you're saying is 100% correct. But what kind of got me was that we have federal numbers, and I'm not going to use the term statistics. These are federal numbers that show it does happen equally. It doesn't make a difference if you're a woman or a man. But then we also have a ton of private industry numbers that is what's mostly used to show that women are the larger number of abused victims. And it all comes down to the financial gain. And this is always the case. Money will always trump truth. We've said this a million times. So why is there more money involved in women victims than there are men victims?
Because of the women's rights movement that came into play, and it became
The
overly
suffrage
aggressive.
movement.
Yep. Don't get me wrong. I believe in women's rights as much as I believe in men's rights. But when it becomes skewed with too much power to one gender or one group, that's a problem. And if you look back, a lot of those national numbers are drawn from VAWA, or Women Against Violence Against Women's Act. And so those numbers are extremely skewed because their numbers come from their members, the people that are filing abuse charges from VAWA. Men and boys can't file through VAWA. They don't get support, so very few of them will file through that because there is no support for them. So the numbers are horribly skewed because the national is getting those numbers from that instead of getting it from true sources where it's interviewing both men and women, not just not just where their victims are all women. And that's why the skew, because men don't report. So if men aren't reporting, how are you going to have their numbers to put in a national average?
Yeah, I'm going to tell you a story real quick. Now, this was in 2008. I was driving to work, and I always listen to the local radio show. It's always fun. They always have good stories and jokes and stuff. And they were talking about this guy. This happened allegedly in Japan, where this guy was repeatedly going to police over there, claiming his wife was beating him, abusing him. And for 3 years, the police didn't do anything. Well, apparently there was an investigator that got involved because the guy had come in with black eyes, arm, really banged up. And they started investigating, and they went to interview the wife. She was like 5'2", maybe 90 pounds. But they found out she was an 11th degree black belt who was literally beating her husband. And what got me during the show is everybody was laughing about this, how comical this was. They weren't showing the seriousness that here you had a victim. Let's get the genders out of it. You had a victim who was repeatedly being beaten by their partner. And people, because it was a man getting beat, people were laughing about it. And this was on a daily talk show in South Carolina. And I was like, do you not understand how serious this matter is? I mean, had this investigator probably not gotten involved, this guy could have winded up dead from the abuse.
Mm-hmm.
So we have TV shows today that show domestic violence, both men on women and women on men. And we show it as a comical aspect. Our children watch these shows. They're being programmed. Oh, that's fine if she hits him or him hits her. You know. So
Mm-hmm.
at what point do we draw that line in the court system? Why do we still play the gender card in these cases? Why are
Yep.
we not using factual numbers, not private organization numbers? I had a math teacher in high school, Coach Walker. He was also the wrestling coach. He was a fantastic teacher. When we got the statistics, he said, I can show you anything with statistics.
Mm-hmm.
I could show you how seatbelts are more dangerous than they are safe if I use the right numbers.
Mm-hmm.
He said nobody in the statistical world ever actually uses the factual numbers. So that's what we're dealing with in the domestic relations courts. Nobody's using factual numbers because of the cash flow.
Yeah, well, get this. I just pulled up an article. It's on SAVE, Assuring Due Process, Fairness, and Equal Opportunities for Men. Just the month of April this year, over 18 murders or attempted murders by women of men. Now that's just April.
Yeah.
So you want to, and those are the
Yeah.
ones that we know about. That's a problem. So
If
oh wait a
I
minute, maybe they go
recall
back. I'm
correctly.
sorry, they splatter all over the place. They're from January to April, excuse me. But either way, that's huge.
Okay.
As far as those are the ones that made it into the news. How many stories of
News. There
abuse
we go.
don't make it into national news or even state news? Hundreds, thousands probably. And that's where I get really annoyed. It's not about the gender. Domestic violence, whether it's perpetrated by a man, by a woman, by a child can commit domestic violence against a parent. It's not okay. Look, I have some clients, and this goes back decades, where her sons would come to her home and they would throw wax at her windows and break them. They would smash the walls, break the things in her house, all at the behest of her ex. I'm not saying that her ex isn't an abuser. Of course he is. But what I'm saying is women do this with their children too. They tell the kids, "Oh, you know, treat your father like shit, to steal his this." In one case, there was a woman who told the kids to put poison in the sugar or the salt that their father used. These things happen. The problem is they're not coming up in national news, whether it's because there's a gag order on the case or because the case wasn't a big enough deal or because they still haven't determined whether it was a murder or not.
Well,
Larry
look, let's
Marco
take one of
has
the most
done
famous
a
cases.
okay.
Let's go.
Let me just
Let's
say
take one
this.
of the most
Larry
famous
DeMarco has
cases in U.S. history.
okay.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say Larry DeMarco has a video on the history of PA that goes back like 100 years. And it's really phenomenal, showing how it was affecting both men and women.
Yeah.
And you
So
were saying,
let's because the way you started going, let's take one of the most famous cases in the United States, which isn't too far back. Susan Smith.
oh God, yes.
Everybody who's anybody from that time period remembers Susan Smith, a mother in Union County, South Carolina, who drowned her two sons, a 3-year-old son and a 1-year-old son. And why, we that made national news. But how many of those stories of mothers, of females who've done this to their children don't get national attention.
Before PA became a really big thing and this was going on, you have to remember anybody who's abusing and doing the PA is mentally ill. And that's something we all need to recognize that if this was an intact family and you had a parent who was mentally ill and you did not want that family to break up, you would be working to make sure everybody was in therapy. But I can go back even further to a Texas case where the mother drove the van into the water and drowned all 5 kids. And the father kept telling the doctors, I think she's got postpartum. I think she's got postpartum depression. And nobody was listening to him. Nobody was helping him. Done. So and that is a big problem because women do, after you have a child, they can have a chemical imbalance that triggers a postpartum depression issue.
Look at Brooke Shields. Brooke Shields speaks openly about her postpartum.
Mm-hmm.
And she got help. South Carolina, they recommend, I think, 3 weeks after you give birth for the mother to come in and get checked. But it's a recommendation. They can't make somebody come in.
Yep.
But here's the thing is they do it and I think a couple of other states recommend it too, but they do it at different intervals. But we forget that postpartum can set in at any time.
Absolutely.
And you can't bring it up in domestic relations courts without a diagnosis.
Well, that's kind of like a lot of things. When, like, for example, I had a case with a client and the guardian ad litem, who I testified against, claimed that the client was mentally ill and giving her all sorts of diagnoses on the witness stand. This guardian ad litem did not have a mental health degree. All she had was an attorney degree. That was it. She got caught practicing medicine without a license. And this happens all the time with professionals like guardian ad litems and attorneys for the minor children. No, you can't do that. You are not trained to officially make that kind of statement. You don't have a master's or a doctorate in mental health.
We see it all the time, Joni. These GALs, guardian ad litems, repeatedly violate their practice guidelines by recommending what parents should get custody, by what the children should undergo, all this stuff without having any sort of background in these areas. And the judges believe them.
And that's what's scary. There's a list out there of the supposed hall of shame that was put out by Tina Swithin. 90%, if not more, of the people listed on her custody evaluators list of hall of shame don't even do custody evaluations. And they're mental health professionals, most of them, but they don't do custody evaluations because it's a special realm, or because that's not what they are concentrating their expertise on. But just like you have people going in claiming mental health issues, we got people out there claiming that people are doing custody evaluations that aren't even doing these custody evaluations. I'm on that list, along with most of my colleagues, and they don't do custody evaluations. And that's the other thing. Guardian ad litem should not be doing custody evaluations, especially if they're an attorney. They don't have the skills for this. They can't discern false allegations from true allegations, or where the line is blurred in the middle where maybe both parents are doing it. Which brings up something.
I think with GALs, one of the biggest problems is that like you, I probably read 1,000 GAL reports, if not more, handed in the courts. And it's always funny that they are injecting their opinion into these reports and in their testimonies, instead of what they're supposed to be doing is stating the facts of what they've observed, what they've heard to the court, so the courts can make the proper decision. It's well, I say this, it's not supposed to be a court of opinion, but it is. We all know this. It's why are you not following your guidelines, which is in most states, is state the facts.
Interesting you're bringing this up. As you know, yesterday was my 25th anniversary barbecue, and I didn't get to look through my mail. And my husband says, "Oh, there's a package that came." I opened it up the very end of this morning. It is from our governor, Ned Lamont. I don't know if you can see this, folks. It's kind of hard because I'm sitting so close. This
It's
is
kind of blurry.
International
Yeah.
False Accused Awareness Day. He proclaimed it that we have a as September 9th, false abuse, awareness day. I'm good. This is good. This is bringing the awareness that these false allegations got to stop because it's not healthy for families. There's an old slogan that I
Yeah.
actually use from the 1960s, the Vietnam War. It said, "War is not healthy for children and other living things." I changed it to "Custodial interference is not healthy for children and other living things." Children cannot manage this hostile, aggressive, custodial interference, especially where there is no abuse. And even where there is abuse, as Linda Gottlieb will tell you, she worked with kids in foster care for over 25 years. These kids were removed from their parents because of abuse or neglect. The one, the two questions that those kids had, 99 to 100% of them, is when can I go home? When can I see my mom or dad? Children gravitate to their abusers. So when the courts are claiming that some kid wants to live with this parent and the other parent's saying, but that parent's keeping the kid from me, you can't go by what the kid's saying because they will go with the abuser because they're so afraid of being abandoned and alone and not having that parent in their life because that parent, the child's in self-protection mode not to lose that aggressive, alienating parent. And they know that the targeted parent who's not alienating loves them unconditionally. They know that the other parent only loves them under the condition that they hate the other parent. And so now with
See,
all
it's funny because we talk about,
allegations, you brainwash a kid into believing something that's not true. And they actually really believe it. And when these kids finally get that epiphany or find out the truth, it devastates their world. And they feel so much guilt that they were so mean to a parent who is actually a really good parent. And they
well,
psychologically
it's
quit and
funny that
become
when we
suicidal.
always, our conversation always go to a private concept of parent A and parent B. But we forget that we've seen rise in numbers over the last several months of this sort of behavior coming from state entities like DCS, DHS, CPS, where
Well, that's
they're
the
the
human
actual
trafficking.
abusers in some of these cases.
Right. And that's the
Yeah,
there's
it's
a big thing about
legalized
human
human trafficking.
trafficking by DSS, which it's absolute. I've helped a couple of families keep their kids from getting stolen by Department of Social Services. And we know why this happens. Part of the problem is over the past 8, 10 years, the funding for the Department of Social Services has become decreased. And when it gets decreased, they have no way to pay for their services or for their employees. So they are looking for ways to get that money back in. And the only way they have is through Title D 4D of our US rules, which gives DSS money for every child that they foster or adopt out. It's ten to $15,000 per year per child. And the older the child, the more money. The more handicapped the child, the more money. The younger the child, less money because they're easy to adopt or foster out because they're so young. Troubled kids, obviously,
Yeah,
more money.
well,
Alert, more
we're going to
money.
probably. I want to bring this up on another show with, and I'm going to try to get Mark Ludwig in on this show because he's a Title 4D knowledge base from anywhere. Because a lot of parents now have heard Title 4D, Social Security Act, this is how the state's funding these programs and stuff. But there are so many specifics to this subject matter that Mark is aware of, and that's why I want to get him on so he can talk about and educate people on this, exactly how this works and everything. But you know, it's shocking to me And I think a lot of people who aren't parents, who aren't in domestic relations courts, and they hear this and they watch shows like ours, and they start realizing is that, wait a minute, these agencies are paid for kids that they can move around, that they can take. We have laws to prevent Mexico trafficking children into our country or vice versa. But what about our own state agencies? A
Agreed.
lot of these social workers, and I use that term loosely in this subject matter, don't even have backgrounds in sociology or child welfare or anything like this. They have a college degree from philosophy, and they're hired by social services as a case manager or an investigator. No
Yep,
experience, no background, but
that's
that's who
true.
we go with.
And it's scary,
You know,
Clint.
it's funny to me that, yeah, it is, because it's funny to me that here in the United States we believe we're so progressive when in other countries like Ireland, in order to be a social worker there working for their state agency, you have to have the background, you have to have the degrees, the history of education in these subject matters.
Agreed. This is
But here,
why yeah. I mean, for decades, I have begged DSS to allow me to train them so they can recognize false allegations from true allegations, recognize when a parent is committing custodial interference and when they're not, recognize when the children's behavior patterns are indicative of a parental conflict. And I've offered for free, I've offered to train the judges, the courts here in Connecticut. The good old boys and girls network here is so powerful that they blackball and block me from even being able to do this. And that's not okay. You're not hurting me. You're hurting families when you do that. And the only reason to hurt a family this way is because it's for greed and because I'm going to upset your apple cart. And I
they're
don't like
protecting their
being
bottom
politically,
line.
I don't like feeling like this is a political agenda or a greed agenda, but it is, and it bothers me because coming from a mental health background and a family training background, this is scary because these kids, these are the future of our country, and I have said this for decades. If you destroy the children that are our future of our
But
country, who do you think's running our country?
see, you use the term political agenda. I don't think it's a political agenda. I think it's just a greed agenda.
You're right, you're
Period.
right, but I do see a little bit of
You know, you
political in
have you
there.
have Democrats, you have liberals, you have independents, all agree that PA exists, that is wrong, it harms children. But these individuals try to get laws passed majority of the time, but it's the ones who are making the financial gain off of children that prevent this.
Yep, because they got the
There are
dough
lobbyists
or the
out there.
connections. They got the dough or the connections to block,
Yeah,
to pay off, or to say, hey, I'll vote for you if you do this, or I will have all of my friends and clients vote for you. I will help support what. No, this is not okay. This is why the women's organizations are so hell-bent that only women are abused and domestic violence, and we got to protect women and children. But they forget that a large part of this problem is because of the greed to make the money and not care what's happening to the children when the allegations are false. False allegations are more dangerous and traumatizing to a child than the true abuse, because when it's true abuse, physical, a child, you can see a bruise, you can see a broken arm, you can say, okay, yes, my parent really hurt me. But when it's psychological, it's internal. And if you're not getting the help to recognize that it's an internal, that it isn't true, that you're being told things that are false, that are changing your memories and the narrative, you have no way to heal from it because you have no way to you don't recognize what it is as a child. And you psychologically split, you become
well,
depressed and suicidal.
because what you just said, I'm going to direct people to a previous show we did, which was not part of the debate show. It was an interview with Kevin, who told us what his mother was doing was trying to reprogram his memories of his father. And it worked for a while.
Yep. Elizabeth Loftus has a huge study on this. And after she did it, many other people did. So I have another thing that I've been saying for decades. This is a cult of anger, fear, hatred, and rage by one parent or agency against another parent. And just like Jim Jones, Waco, the Moonies, if we can, if a cult leader can convince a complete adult stranger to join their cult, imagine how easy it is for a parent to do it to a child, especially when they can create a false narrative and the child says, "Oh, okay, yeah, you said that happened. Okay, I believe you." Here's a prime example. I've used this one over because when I do, every parent says to me, "Yeah, that happened to me." Yeah, not every, but a large father's going to the supermarket with his kid. They're getting out of the car and they're going to walk. And the kid takes off into the traffic. Father grabs him by the arm, pulls him back to save him from being hit by a car. Only this is not what mommy tells him. Mommy tells him he abused him when he grabbed his arm. Child eventually says to dad, "Well,
Mhm.
you abused me when you grabbed me and pulled me to when we were walking to the parking lot to go get ice cream from the supermarket." And the father says, "No, that's not quite what happened. You were running into traffic and I had to grab you and pull you back so you didn't get hit by a car." Child goes, "Oh, oh." Do they equate that there was a false memory from the mother? Probably not. They just equate it as maybe a missed or false memory that they had. They still haven't put it together, not until there are enough false memories from that one parent that they can see a pattern and get an epiphany. And speaking of epiphanies,
And the sad part about that is they don't realize it till they're older.
right, which is where I'm going to go. Most of these kids that are age late 20s, 30 on up, that are alienated, there is really hard to get them to switch over and to recognize that they were brainwashed. Why? Because they didn't have the internet like we have today. And so the human brain stops growing at 25, stops maturing at 35. So while this is all going on, they're not getting the information they needed to critically think that maybe what they're being told isn't accurate. So they don't get it, and it only happens when they get a real smack in the face epiphany, like Rob Thomas. I can't think of his first name right now. That Robert Thomas? No, not Robert. Ryan Thomas. Happened to him. It took him to age 35 to figure this out. And the only reason he figured it out was because he lost his first wife and he didn't really understand it, but he knew that she left because she couldn't take his mother's backstabbing her constantly. He remarries, and the same thing's happening with the second wife. And that's when he goes, Epiphany. Oh my God, this is what she did he did. I think this is how he says it. Oh my God, this is what she did to my father. Oh my God, Epiphany. Now, the kids that are younger than 25 in this era are getting epiphanies a little sooner. Why? Because they have the internet access. They can go on, they can look for a search. There's articles, there's more TV shows. Law and Order must have at least 6 shows that involve custodial interference, and in a couple of them even mention parental alienation in them. You
Mhm.
have movies like Mrs. Doubtfire that have some of this in, but at least in Mrs. Doubtfire, the recognition that yes, okay, he was doing whatever he could to keep his kids in his life, and it actually worked for him. Um, But these kids, today's generation, have a little more access to the information that they need. And one of the things we're finding is that when these kids finally get out from under the control of the alienating, custodial, interfering parent, and they go off to college, they're learning more in college in this area. They're coming up against meeting other people who are going through this because it's so prevalent. And now they start to compare notes, and now they start to say, wait a minute. And now they reach out. Or it's easier for a parent to now reach out because when the kids are living in the alienating parent or custodial interfering parent's home, they can't get emails, they can't get phone calls. And so they have no idea. They think that the other parent doesn't care about them. They're not calling, they're not writing, they're not doing anything because it's all being interrupted. I have a client right now whose kids are 35 and up and into their 40s, and the kids will not respond to a single email or letter, even snail mail. Now, I've always known that her ex is in the emails and that the emails she has, he has access to and he blocks them, or that he's changed the password so they can't get into it or whatever, or tells them, don't worry about it, I'll take care of those emails. So she's now sending them snail mail. But these adult women are so terrified of their father or so ingrained in the false narratives that they can't even respond to their mom. And their mom's sending them things saying, I'm sorry, maybe I could have done better. I know I'm not perfect. Maybe I didn't realize some of the things that were going on. In this case, we think there could have been sexual abuse by the father of the eldest child. We're not really sure because the father has lied about his whole childhood. Nobody even knows what happened with his biological father, not even his step siblings. And there were issues with the stepfather that are part of the story. So these are older children. They can't get an epiphany because of all the trauma and the connection to their father at this point. And that's sad because unfortunately, this is a multi-generational mental health issue that gets passed on from generation to generation unless we can stop it. And we need to stop it because if we keep passing this on, these new 2.5 kids per family, although that number's probably dropped a bit, you have a chance. Let's go 50% of 1.25 kids becoming narcissistic and taking on this pattern of behavior. I got to
Let me stop you there. Okay. Let me stop you there because what we're now talking about, and let's first apologize to our watchers, our listeners. We jump around a lot on the show. So we've covered a ton of information just in the little bit of time we've already been doing this. So it's hard to sometimes follow along, but unfortunately, one subject opens up to another subject. It's just the way it is.
It's a can of worms.
So yeah. So one of the things we're talking about now is basically generational abuse that is passed down to these children who are continuing it until somewhere down the line it breaks that cycle.
And here's an interesting piece, the multi-generational. There could be 3 kids in the family. One kid is going to become the alienator. One kid might go both ways. He refuses to get in the middle of it. One child might end up being the alienated parent because folks, you have to understand, as a child's growing up, their parents are their role models. And if this is the only role model they have, how are they going to learn that this is not okay? How are they going to learn anything differently? My example I love to use is if your whole life you're taught to walk forward, and you get in the real world and everybody's walking backwards, well, everybody else has to be wrong because otherwise your entire life is a lie. And the narcissist cannot handle that. That's why they don't go to therapy. Because in order to go to therapy, they either have to admit they've got a problem, or that they have a mental health issue and that they're not perfect, or they go to therapy to prove they're perfect.
Well, there's another one, and I think this is more noticeable today, is you have these children who grew up in abusive homes, mentally, emotionally, whatever. And at some point, they realize that the abuse is there, but they cling on to this desire of having a loving parent, a loving fantasy that never existed. So they go along with that narrative and then they pass it on to their children. So, this is something that has been around for ages. It's not something new age or anything like this. There's scientific study, and I love the fact that there's scientific study on these things, because otherwise we have issues bringing it up. It becomes a opinion. But this thing has gone on for so many years, and we know it's out there. The question is, how do we stop it? How do we prevent it from continuing? I love, on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, you always see, well, if you're keeping your child from a loving parent, what are you going to do, or how are you going to feel if your child's partner starts doing it to them? Then you're going to be on the other side of the fence.
Yep.
But you did it to that child and loving parent.
Yep. Well, I think the only way we're going to kind of stop this, or get a handle on it, if you will, because we probably can't ever stop it, but we can reduce it, is making it mandatory that proper educational and training is going on. Mandatory that teaches anybody working in the family courts and with families how to recognize false allegations from true abuse, psychological abuse from non-psychological abuse, where it's an actual real issue that caused the trauma. If we don't get this kind of training in there, along with understanding that just because somebody has a mental health illness doesn't mean they're not a good parent. If every Vietnam War veteran, or every person who's come back from the military and come back from the war, or being on the front lines, lost their kid because they have PTSD, this would be horrific. But it's happening. We're seeing. I recently spoke with somebody from a VA hospital, and she said they are seeing a massive increase in parental alienation in their Vietnam vets and their military. I shouldn't say Vietnam. They're military veterans, and they now believe that parental alienation is real because they're seeing such an intense explosion of it. You can't deny
Look
this.
at how many domestic relations courts cases were involving military family members who were being deployed, who had separated, and now all of a sudden they're not a fit parent because they have the ability of being deployed and being killed. That
That's
doesn't
another
make them
one.
an unfit parent.
No. How many parents are
That's
truck
my issue,
drivers?
is that it becomes a very difficult issue.
But think about how many parents are truck drivers, and they're on the road all the time, and they're home first limit. Or you have the parent who has to travel a lot for their business, and so they're not home taking care of the kids. The other parent. It doesn't make them a bad parent. It means they're doing their job to support the family, whether it's a mother or a father. We are finding more and more mothers are having to be away from the home because they are getting the better paid jobs. Not because they're a bad
Yeah.
parent or they're a better parent, but because it just so happens their degree or their qualifications are lending toward a more fluid income, fluid, stable, nice income. That doesn't make them a bad parent because
You know,
home.
I always get a kick out of this because this is a subject matter that's not very much touched on. We touched on it a little bit, is the suffrage movement and stuff like this. We want equal rights for every individual on the planet. But what does that mean? Somebody usually wants a little more.
Right, and
And
that can't
I've
be.
always said this since I've been advocating. Yeah, I've always said this since I've been advocating, is today's society, we've given equal rights, but we've given it to a larger extent to one side, which now negates the equality of it. You
Well,
know,
that's
and
like
it's
the
not
whole
that
thing with the
this
health
has happened
then.
intentionally.
Right.
Yeah, It's not that I don't think this happened intentionally. It just happened over time that this has occurred. Um, Another thing I'm going to state here is that we forget that there is federal law that states if these nonprofit private organizations have assistance programs for abused women, they're required to have those same services in ability and financial for men, but
There
only
is,
about 60% of them, yeah, only about 60% of them actually follow that guideline. That leaves another 40% that are one-sided.
which also, I mean, this brings up so many inadequacies and inequalities. Women, we have massive programs for breast cancer. Men, prostate cancer is the same level of as breast cancer. I got two friends just this month alone who told me they have prostate cancer. But I also have several friends that told me they have breast cancer. And men, by the way, you can get breast cancer. And in the meantime, lung cancer kills
Mhm.
just an equal number of men and women, probably.
Yeah. One of the things, you know, we talk about domestic relations courts, and people I don't think understand that it touches on all the subjects we're covering pretty much here today. You know, but it all comes down to the bottom line of money. These courts generate over $60 billion a year to separate families, to separate children from loving parents.
Yep. And
So,
that's that.
everybody says it. Stop the funding of domestic relation courts. Stop the incentives. But how do you do that? It's been going on for so long. It's not an overnight process.
Really stopping the incentives. It's making sure those incentives are equally applied to men and women, male and female, no matter age, no matter, even if they're they're gay or lesbian or whatever. We need to have equal across the board so that the children and these families are getting the necessary supports so we don't have all these mass murders and that are going on, whether it be a mass murder by one person or a murder by a parent, or I mean, these people, they're just driving the cars into crowds, or whatever it is. Now, if we don't address this as an equal opportunity issue, we can't solve for it. Because if you're only address, okay, it's kind of like this. If you only put air in three of your tires, well, you're riding on one flat and you're not getting very far. So if we don't apply it equally, we have a very uneven, unlevel playing field or family field, and it's going to be lopsided, and it's going to explain why we have all these mental health, anxiety, and everything else that's going on. It's going to explain a lot of it. I'm not going to tell you that the children coming up in our
Well,
generation
that's the thing.
don't have anxiety for other
That's the
reasons
thing
besides
is,
family.
yeah, mental health has become such a hot topic in today's society, politically, financially, medically. It covers the whole gambit. But we don't talk about the mental damage that are being done in these family courts to children.
Well,
I always, now,
letting a
anybody
child
who knows me knows
testify.
I've always focused on children. Parents are a different subject matter. But it always comes down to the mental injuries. And like you said earlier, sticks and stones may break my bones. And words will never hurt me. It's actually not true.
No,
Words have
oh,
more power than a stick or a bat or anything,
because you have
because
to
that's a
think about it.
lifelong
Well, not only
injury.
that, it's internalized. You can't see it on the outside. Many people, men especially, have been raised to not cry, to not have emotion, to hide their feelings. So, when you've got somebody who's depressed or struggling mentally, health wise, they don't get to address it because they're afraid to. They're afraid if they do that, they're going to be considered a weak, horrible, terrible parent and no good in person.
Yeah.
And that's why the suicide rate for men is so much higher than for women. Yet, do we address that inequality? Do we say, oh, we should only be addressing suicide for men, not women? No, because it's
And
such.
I think it's important to state that a larger number of women are out there advocating for shared parenting, equal time with both parents. It's there. I mean, the number of men are large, but there are more women out there advocating for this sort of change.
And I think that's a good topic, shared parenting, for another day, because there are actually positives, and I don't want to get into it, for women having shared parenting. And we can discuss this at another time because I think that's a great topic. And we've got a lot of shared parenting organizations out there. I actually am on the board of an international one as well. Um, I think that's a great topic for another day.
You know, we have just, we have our other shows, Childhood Interrupted. We have the webinars we do for PASI. This show here is something I think is really different than anything else out there because it's just sitting and talking and having a conversation about these subject matters from a professional to I'll still call myself a layperson because I've not been at this for over 30 years like you. uh, but that you never stop learning on this subject matter.
I think
There's so
something,
much data out there.
and I think something that
Yeah,
our
there's so
audience,
much data out there
right? I think something our audience,
that it overwhelms people. Yeah.
I think that
Because let's talk, some of the shows we want to do.
right. I
Go
think
go
something
ahead.
the audience needs to know about me is that I am a victim of domestic violence. I have had several boyfriends who beat me. My daughter's biological father, he had a mental health problem and he wasn't getting help for it. He tried to strangle me when I was 5 months pregnant. That was the third time he attacked me. I hoped he was going to get better. It didn't happen that way. He was in and out of jail, in and out of rehabs. And that is a very important thing for people to recognize that when there is domestic violence, 90% of the time, maybe even more, it involves some kind of substance abuse, usually alcohol, that triggers the domestic violence, man or woman.
Well, as a journalist, I've seen firsthand how these court systems fail a lot of these victims mentally, medically, legally. Uh, and it gets to a certain point where I've seen a lot of these victims just give up, just accept it. This is how life is, which it shouldn't be that way. But let's talk about some of the shows we do want just real quickly in closing because we've been on for just about our time frame. We're still wanting to do a show on constitutionality in domestic relations courts. Why is there no due process in these courts? Why are private parties having to, pay these large amounts for private attorneys when if you can't, when our constitution states if you can't afford an attorney, one will be appointed to you? Why are these attorneys only applied in social service cases, and then the attorney you get may be a tax lawyer that has no experience in domestic relations? Then we wanted, I mean, what are other concepts that we've been talking about, Joni? I mean, we're going to
Well,
cover
yeah,
the silver bullet. We're
you
going to
know what?
cover Title
Yep.
4D. We're going to cover a million different topics we have. And that's what separates this show from others is we tie it all together because it's a never ending story. Is what is it? The Vikings, the Greeks, the Chinese always had that story of the snake that's eating its own tail.
Hmm.
And that's pretty much what domestic relation courts feel like for a lot of people is you're eating your own tail. You're running around in a hamster cage.
Yep, and you get nowhere. I mean, you brought up something, and I'm going to mention it and we'll re-bring it back. But one of the reasons I think that it is very hard to get an attorney in a family court of law, and we touched on this, is, despite the fact it is a constitutional right, it's because the family courts really aren't a true court. They exist, but they're not a real court, so they can bypass the constitutional right to have an party appointed because they're not a true court of law. They're a family mediation in front of a judge or whatever. And I think that may be part of the problem.
Yeah, I love the fact that you brought this up because as long as I've been at this, and probably even longer for you, these domestic relations courts have always been referred to as kangaroo courts. They exist at state level, but there's no constitutional guideline that these courts are even supposed to exist. And again, that's why they're able to skirt the due process guidelines, because
Yeah.
they really don't have the ability. Even Kevin said it in our interview with him, is they cannot hear criminal matters, which most courts can in some aspect. Domestic relations courts are the one court that cannot adjudicate a criminal matter such as domestic violence, but they hear these cases.
And I have been saying this for
How?
decades and decades, that a family court, anything that has to do with a criminal charge, needs to be in criminal court. Family courts does a preponderance of evidence, which means, oh, I can make an accusation, I don't have to have any proof, and you're going to get found guilty of it. Versus in criminal court, where it's got to be clear and convincing. You can't just make an accusation and provide no evidence. This is what our democracy and our courts were based on, is you must prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the person is guilty. And we really need, that's really why the family courts cannot. Family court, in anything civil, financial, you want to keep your mediation on your financial and all that stuff in family court, go right ahead. But if you're going to make an accusation that has anything to do with any kind of a criminal charge, it must immediately be referred to criminal court. It cannot.
I know a couple of cases like this, and we'll make this as simple as possible, where a parent came to pick up their children for their parenting time. The other parent called the police, said they were trespassing. The parent that was there pick up was given a paper, charged and everything, which is a criminal charge. Trespass is a criminal charge. And it was brought up in family court, never carried over to criminal court, where it probably would have been dismissed.
Absolutely, because you had a court order. That parent had a court order to have visit parenting time with their child, and that parent found a way to circumvent the system by filing a false police report. And I'm sorry, that parent who filed that false police report should have had to do community service with children that have no parents, so they could understand how traumatizing it is to take a good parent from a child.
It's one of the reasons why I asked Kevin last show was, should these things be held, these tactics be held at a standard of criminality? And I believe he said yes, because they are criminal acts. I mean, perjury, false police reports, false reports to the courts. These are all criminal acts. Yeah, these are all criminal acts that we have listed in books for criminal court, but they're never adjudicated in family courts. They're just bypassed, or they're used as tools.
Right. Family court cannot adjudicate on criminal matters, and I've said this for decades, because they're really just a civil court for family issues, and you cannot bring in a criminal charge in there. And when an attorney allows this to happen, or a judge, they have just caused a due process rights violation under the 14th Amendment and the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
I know one case that I know personally, that the family court judge scheduled a hearing for a criminal charge. The guy knew the public defender's office. He made a phone call to them. That lawyer who knew him told the judge that she couldn't hear it because it was a criminal charge, that she had to bump it up to criminal court. The judge dropped it because she knew it wouldn't hold up. but she was willing to hear it in her courtroom and adjudicate it. This is what happens, I think, a lot of times when these judges overstep their authority, they get power hungry, or they're just, that type of person. And let's
I
face
have,
it, every industry in the planet has that.
yep, I have a case, a client here, who his guardian ad litem, an ex-wife, filed false allegations of sexually abusing his daughter. It cost him $250,000 and 5 years to prove that, or I don't know if it's 5 years, but quite a few years to prove that he was innocent. He then moved to and was exonerated. The mother was proved to be an alienator and filing false allegations. He then moves to family court with his criminal decision to get sole custody. The guardian ad litem on the criminal case contacts the family court guardian ad litem, gets her to drop off the case so that this criminal guardian ad litem could get put on it. Conflict of interest, not allowed to do this. In family court, he won sole custody of his daughter because of the game by the mother. Before he get custody of the kid, the guardian ad litem assisted this mother in kidnapping the kid to another country. He is still trying to get that kid back.
Yeah.
But this guardian ad litem attorney is been in the game for as long as I've been doing this work. She's well respected by the courts because they believe this narcissistic attorney and think that she's the peach, the cream on top of the peaches. Well, he made a report to the Bar Association, this father, and the Bar Association came back and said to her, and this is probably after hundreds of reports of reports against her to the bar where nothing ever happened to her. Finally, the bar said, you either face the music or retire early. Nobody should get the opportunity to retire early just so they don't have to face the music.
Mm-hmm.
Because she got away, walked away clean and clear, didn't get held accountable for her psychopathic, sociopathic, narcissistic behavior of continuing to file false allegations and impede with this father's relationship with his daughter.
Well, I mean, look at these cases. Look at some of these cases where these, domestic violence charges are bumped up to criminal court. The individual is found innocent, which criminal court, by our judicial hierarchy, is a higher court. If you're found innocent in a higher court, and this is the belief that most people have, lower courts can't entertain that. So why are these people being found innocent in the higher court, but then being found guilty in domestic relations courts that can't adjudicate criminal matters?
Again, we're back to the constitutionality, which I think is going to make a great subject. We also want to do one on shared parenting and what the benefits are to both genders, and even more importantly, to the children.
Children.
Yep. We have to remember that as an adult, we have the emotional mental maturity to understand what's going on. A child does not have this. Their brain doesn't stop growing to 25 or maturing to 35. And in fact, this is why our own federal government, after centuries of research, only do not allow a child to vote till they're 18, drink or smoke till they're 21, or rent a car till they're 25. And there are other things that they are forbidden from doing until a certain age because they don't have the emotional mental maturity. This is why children should never be brought in to testify in court, in open court. Can they go talk to a judge? Sure. In private. But open court, you just forced a child, whether it's a true story or not, to say something negative about their other parent. And that's not okay. That's traumatizing.
It's funny. It's funny you just stated that, because I have a family that I'm counseling and helping out. This is a social service case. They're trying to terminate the parental rights of these parents to their twins. One is already in adoption process. The two twins are 10 years old.
You're separating twins?
DSS.
That's
DSS. Hold on. DSS at 10 years old wanted the child to testify in court.
No, no, no. This is where we really have some major, major issues. Our agencies are more, this is the same thing. Your agencies, like DSS, and your greedy attorneys, it's all about the money, 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 money. What's that song
But
by Liza Minnelli? Money,
here's
money, money.
here's something I'm going to state. The judge in this particular case, who I think is a very good judge, he's actually the chief justice for family courts in that area, in that county. He leaned up and he said, I am not going to hear this child's testimony, whether private or on the stand. She's 10 years old. We're not doing that. So I give that judge very high props
Yes.
for having that moral
Uh,
compass to
yep.
follow that guideline.
I agree. And that's
You
where I
know,
think maybe we can bring this to an end. That moral compass. Many of these people that we are
yeah,
dealing with, their moral compass is stuck. It's not spinning around true north. It can't.
you know, we're not bad mouthing all domestic relations judges. We're not bad mouthing all lawyers, GALs. There are a good number of judges, lawyers, GALs out there.
But
But
not
the
enough.
problem is there are so few of them compared to the financial gains that the majority of them are doing.
And
Even
unfortunately,
foster care.
yep. And unfortunately, having even just those ones that are morally corrupt, if you will, they think they're doing the right thing. They believe. I believe. I believe. I'm sorry. The evidence is showing something different. You can believe what you want to believe. It doesn't make it true. And that's
You
where
know,
the difference
just
between the truth and the
in
lie.
closing, here's my opinion on GALs. In closing, and here's my opinion on GALs. I think anybody who wants to be a guardian ad litem, a GAL, needs to have had children, and those children need to be at the age of 18. So that person has experienced what a child goes through all the way to
Well, if
adulthood.
they have to have children, or they could have had nieces and nephews. What they need is to have had an extensive, intensive training in psychology and mental health. That's more important. Okay. Because you
Well,
cannot,
I believe
because there are
experience
people out
sometimes
there that can't have
trumps
children.
education.
There are people out there who haven't had
I
children,
think,
but they have animals, and their
yeah,
animals are their children. Okay. And I've
but
seen parents fight over their animals.
I honestly think sometimes experience trumps education.
You can.
So they have to have some sort of experience with children. I mean, it's
Yes.
one tomato type deal, But yeah, they need to have a better background than 8 hours of training and one sit through one custody case. That's the majority of the guidelines throughout the country. And then, hey, we'll sign off on a paper and you can start helping us save these children and make money off of it. You know, uh, but I think that's
Children
a
are
good
not a
place to close
commodity.
the show.
Yep. Children are not a commodity.
I think that's a good place to close the show for the day. We, I always get a kick. This is what our third show, and we always cover a ton of information in this 1 hour show that we've done. Uh, I think it is unique in a lot of aspects. I think parents, professionals, anybody will get just a well-educated, rounded thing. And again, we do jump around a lot on the show, but unfortunately, that is the way it happens. So, we're going to close, and folks, we'll be at this again next Sunday. Where else would you want to be on a Sunday except on here? um so we'll see you guys next week.
Bye, folks.